And it says we are live.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I am number one Marmaduke fan, and today I am joined by the honorary man king. The
Leader of the
Hi,
awkward
buddy.
squad. Yeah. I am
All right,
the right
go ahead.
leader of the awkward cop squad and honorary man king. Yeah.
So this is neat because you've been discussing the brand new 2020 Iron Man reboot series. Dan Slott is off. They've got a new creative team on it. You and a few other comic book channels have been discussing Iron Man, but you have one of the most well-informed perspectives on the Iron Man characters. So for people who haven't checked out your channel, it's linked in the description, by the way. Tell us a little bit about like your history with this character and how much you've read about him.
So admittedly, I started off as basically a normie when it came to Marvel Comics. That I didn't really start reading Marvel Comics. I read other kinds of comics, like indie comics and so on, previous to this. But I didn't really start reading Marvel comics until about 2012. And I was inspired to do so basically by the Avengers movie. And I took a liking to the Iron Man character from those first Avengers movies. And so I was curious and I said, so what is he like in the comics? A lot of times when I see something in a movie that I know is adapted from some other source material and I'm interested, it piques my interest, that I want to actually go and look at the source material because a lot of times the source material ends up being better. You know how they say the book is always better than the movie, you know? So I was curious. And so I decided that I was going to read the Iron Man comics. And because I am a completist by nature and an obsessive, I said, well, where am I going to start? Because if you look at the whole Marvel Comics universe, it's a very hard universe to kind of jump right into. But I just said, well, I'm a completist, I'm an obsessive, I'm just going to start at the very beginning. So I started with Tales of Suspense number 39, and I just read straight through basically every comic entitled Iron Man that existed. and that took a while, obviously, but I finished that up fairly recently. So yeah, I am now in the position of having read basically every comic entitled Iron Man that exists. There might be a few like miniseries I might still be missing. I'm still trying to gather in all of the little edges and stuff, but
definitely the main series you've worked your way through.
The main series I pretty much worked my way through, and so I've seen all of like the ups and downs in quality. I've seen like how things have been like changed and retconned over the years, and yeah, I feel like I have a very good sense of what was intended with this character, and how he's developed over the years and what exactly is his personality and what are his flaws and foibles, shall we say. And so, when I read some of the more recent Iron Man material, like I notice what the modern writers are often doing wrong in terms of that character. So
something I picked up in your review is you also you're willing to throw props to them, which I think some people in YouTube comic book culture, like it's hard for them to throw props at something even if they don't like it. Like what I remember is you mentioning that yes, Tony Stark does get depressed from time to time. That's a big part of his character. So you were willing to give them props for that. But I think we're basically in agreement that something about this new series isn't working for either of us. And for me, like I'm basically familiar with Iron Man. I know of him mostly through Avengers, but I actually haven't deeply read many Iron Man comics. So it was nice for me to kind of hear the perspective of someone who has a real love for this character. Kind of to know that I guess that my feelings on what wasn't working for me is lining up with your perspective as someone who's got a more in-depth knowledge of this.
Yeah, and what? One of the things that I do give writers props when they do things that actually do line up with what I've read. I don't know how. I think one thing that I do want to make clear is that, like, comic book Iron Man is a different character in many ways from the one that you see in the movies. Mm-hmm. So, and I think like one of the big problems I think with a lot of the modern writers is that they're trying to, like you said in your thread, they're trying to do the movie Bad Boy instead of actually going back and being continuous with what was actually established in the comics. They've kind of lost the thread, so they've lost the connection with the comic book character, mm-hmm. and are kind of just trying to write the movie character. But it's funny because nothing against the movie character. I actually like the movie character a lot, but I actually like the movie character more than a lot, actually. but like he's separate in my head, basically. I have comic book Tony, I have movie Tony. They're two separate characters. They have two separate arcs. They're both good arcs in their own respects. But what's funny about the modern writers is they're trying to write the movie character, but they're also doing that badly too.
Yeah.
So
Robert Downey Jr. adds something with his charisma, right? And it's something I genuinely like that he added to the character. But because comic books aren't movies, you probably shouldn't. You can't get away with trying to make him as appealing as the Robert Downey Jr. character. You have to make him work in context of the comic medium you're working in.
Right, exactly.
So I know that this cover was done by Alex Ross, and he did the armor design. The writer on this is Christopher Cantwell. So I guess that's if we're Karen, that's the manager we're sending our complaints to, is Christopher Cantwell.
Yeah.
And I do want to give props to the artist Kafu. Kafu. I really appreciate this style. It's pretty fluid and fun throughout. The only nitpick I had with the art style is I thought maybe in a few places it looked a bit stiff or a little straightforward. Do you have any like general thoughts before we kind of like dive into the story proper?
I like the art. I've said that in both of my reviews that I don't really have a problem with the art personally, but when I read a comic book, to be honest, I'm kind of an art philistine. Like if the art looks good to me, like, then I'll say, okay, that the art's good. I'm not like an expert art critic when it comes to the comic books, but most of my critiques go into the characterization and the story when I read a comic book. So I saw the art and I said, okay, this art's pretty to look at. I like it. Moving on. Let's talk about the story. Like,
Now, one thing I mentioned in kind of like my tweets about this says issue 1, but I feel like if someone's not familiar with Iron Man, they're going to be like some crazy Marvel continuity things they're not caught up on. Like I picked up the whole subplot of, I guess Tony is a clone and they've put this consciousness in a clone's body and the old Tony Stark is dead and this new clone is. So
that's all like leftover from Dan Slott. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your thought on that as in general, as maybe like a comic book problem? Because I feel like Cantwell, he does a moderately good job of trying to start a new story for us. Like it's Tony Stark having a midlife crisis, right?
Yeah.
But it almost seems to me like an unsolvable problem. Like if you have all of this ridiculous baggage for the character, like the second they reference that Tony Stark is a clone, I start like shaking my head. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily blame Christopher Cantwell for that necessarily. There's many things to blame him for, but that I think at this point, starting with Kieran Gillen's run, Iron Man canon just kind of went way off the rails, and now we're stuck with all of this BS that now every writer has to acknowledge and include into their story, even though I would rather not. Like, so, yeah, I don't know that there was anything that Christopher Cantwell could really do there except just say in his exposition, "Oh yeah, by the way, XYZ." Like,
Right.
but that would have been where the editorial notes should have gone. I noticed in your thread they had that really weird editorial note for no reason.
Yeah, in issue 2, like Tom Brevoort, like, and I see an editor's role as it's to help guide the reader through the complex Marvel universe. And Tom Brevoort just had this weird editorial comment. We might see it in issue 2, where he just explained what the Christ archetype is, and it didn't even like allude to any of Tony's specific. I guess Tom just assumed nobody would know what Christian imagery is, so he felt like he had to clarify what Christian imagery is.
When he should have been like, when Tony and Jan are breaking up, they should have put a little star there and said, "Oh, they were going out in these issues." Like,
yeah,
that's where the editorial should have come in and explained. Oh, here's where you can find the explanation of, oh, he's a clone. Here's where you can find the explanation of he was dating Janet. Like, yeah, but nobody said that editorial Marvel was competent at this point. Right. So, yeah.
So diving into issue 1, it kind of opens with some internal monologue talking about how people are starting to feel disconnected from technology. And this is actually a really good type of story to tell, I think. Like, I see this theme in Lord of the Rings, and Tony Stark's a good character to tell it with because he's a tech guy. He's sort of built his fortune and his superhero career on his technological wizardry. But for some reason, I haven't read like the Dan Slott story leading up to this. He's now frustrated with it, and he wants to get back to basics. Could you maybe like fill me in on that? Like, what's happened to Tony that's made him, I don't know, more suspicious of technology?
Well, Dan Slott's story basically ended with this robot revolution plot in which all of the artificial intelligences that existed in the world that were sapient to some degree decided that they were tired of being at the beck and call of humanity, and they basically turned into this little, terroristic group that were going to, seize their own rights by attacking humanity, essentially. And it was a gigantic mess of a plot that didn't really work. And I have a video on my channel about Iron Man 2020 and why that didn't work. But the upshot is that because of all of that, all of the confusion surrounding that, and Tony's adopted brother, and oh my gosh, that's another thing we'll have to talk about another day, is the whole adoption thing. Oh my gosh.
Right. He's not Anthony Stark's real son, even though they look identical and they both share this amazing intellect. He's adopted.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying about, like, ever since Kieran Gillen, the canon has gone so off the rails with Iron Man that there's just so much nonsense in this now that writers are essentially stuck with, unfortunately, unless Marvel just decides one day to do a hard reboot, which I wouldn't necessarily be against at this point because of how messed up it is. And anyway, so because of like the conflict with his brother and all of that, I think that is what's theoretically driving his. That's what's theoretically driving his desire to simplify. Also, he had a lot of questions during the whole Slott run about, if I am essentially an artificial being at this point, like when I brought myself back to life after I was murdered by Carol Danvers, did I actually bring my soul back with me? Was a question that he had. So so that's the question that I think we're trying to address. We're just not doing a very good job with that. Like,
right. So from my perspective,
yeah, go ahead.
From my perspective, I picked up on like, okay, so they've done some sort of resurrection thing with Tony recently, and he's depressed, but not a lot of that is explained. Like, they're trying to address the emotional fallout of killing a character and bringing him back to life again, but not even like properly explaining the setup enough that I can pick up on some of these things. One of the things I did pick up on was this Twitter subplot where Tony Stark keeps tweeting, tweets like, "Hey, I just beat the villain," and everyone is clowning on him and making fun of him. Oh, it's pathetic. And I'm trying to think about it from a writing perspective. I feel like the point of it from the writing perspective is to show that Tony Stark is feeling pathetic and out of touch, but it's so on the nose. Like, why does he even have a Twitter, and why is he even trying to make like these awkward tweets? Isn't he sophisticated enough? I feel like if you had done this in 2009, you could do a little, gag about how Iron Man's on Twitter, and that's a neato thing. But the window of time for that passes, right? And now Twitter is like such a mundane, everyday thing.
Even people who are middle-aged, like Tony is theoretically, would know about it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would say that if you're going to be the Tony being pathetic on Twitter, it's not going deep enough, in my opinion. If the question that's hanging in the air is, I have been resurrected, did my soul come back with me? I think you need to go a little bit deeper than he's out of touch on Twitter. But and I'm sure that that's not just me. Like,
so something you mentioned in your review is that the guy buying a hot rod car is like the number one cliche of a midlife crisis. So Tony, drives a car recklessly and crashes it, and he goes out and he buys a classic hot rod. And people on Reddit, which is supposed to be Reddit, comment that it's like the news of it's the talk of the town. They're all dunking on him. They think he's probably going to tear it out and rebuild it from scratch. I almost like the obviousness of buying the hot rod car, and of him being the kind of guy who would, soup up his own car because it's Tony as an engineer. Yeah. Again, is it too on the nose, or what's your opinion on like Tony Stark buying a hot rod as part of his midlife crisis?
I think it does fit because I think it does fit with him because there is an association between him and hot rod cars that goes back to the very beginning. That's actually like how Happy Hogan becomes part of the Iron Man cast. Is via a hot rod car, essentially. Tony enters a race, basically, but he forgot to charge up before he went into this race. So his heart goes on the fritz in the middle of the race, and his car crashes, and it's Happy Hogan who rescues him. And that is how Happy Hogan becomes part of that universe. So that's way back in the 60s that happened. So there's nothing necessarily out of character. Yeah. It actually does fit for him to want to buy a ride car. Yeah.
Selfish and self-destructive behavior and risk taking. I got the impression, so from in this scene where like the Wasp shows up and I guess breaks up with him. Yeah. I'm guessing this is referencing like a recent subplot. He doesn't feel like a playboy billionaire. He feels like, I don't know, like your average everyday 30-something in a plain t-shirt. He doesn't even look that buff. Yeah. Could you comment on like what's the deal with this Wasp subplot?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, recently they were dating for a while. I think this was just Cantwell saying, "Yeah, I don't want to deal with that. Let's just close that off." But as far as the Tony being the playboy, he's billed as that from the very beginning. But when I read the comics, I didn't always get that impression about him. Like I always thought that the playboy thing was kind of a ruse for him. Like he could put on that role quite well when he needed to, but when you look at how he actually interacts with the various women that have come in and out of his life, I don't get that playboy impression. Like what I get actually is that he's a really over the top, incurable romantic, not someone who likes to play the field. Because when he gets into a girl, he
falls in love.
Yeah, he falls in love, and he falls in love incredibly quickly too. It doesn't take like for my blog where I'm doing the captures and the commentary with some of the older comics. I'm kind of in like the period where he was dating Marianne Rogers, and it's really, it's not that many issues before he's like, "Will you marry me?" Like, and the intensity with which he pursues her, and the intensity of that, the intensity of the relationship he has with her before things go wrong is it really runs counter to the whole playboy image that he has, that is his public reputation in the 616. So I've always interpreted that to be more, that's his public face, that's his public facade. I think it's true that a lot of girls are attracted to him, because women, being as hypergamous as they are going to want to be with someone who is, good looking and wealthy and has a lot of resources, right? And you see in the early comics, you do see in some issues, he will be surrounded by a whole gaggle of women who are all like, "Oh, he's dreamy, he's the bee's knees," whatever. So there's definitely, like, from the women, there's a definite interest, and he doesn't like push that interest away. But if you look at how he actually behaves when he dates a woman for a while, instead of just casually interacting with women in kind of his the party boy milieu that he runs around in, then you get this really opposite impression of who he is. Like,
I'm kind of surprised, when we talked earlier about picking up a cue from the movie. I'm kind of surprised they haven't picked up on the cue of people really resonating with Dad Tony Stark from the last Avengers movie. Is that something you think could fit well with comic Tony Stark's characters, to give him? I'm sure in comic books there'd be up and downs in the marriage, but I do feel like it maybe give him a chance to be in maybe like a dad role and push him beyond kind of like the young playboy archetype, which you've even acknowledged isn't even something that totally defines who he is.
Yeah. That I would be interested in seeing that. I would be interested in seeing how they could incorporate that into the comics in a way that is consistent with comics history. The first thing that would have to happen is he would have to get with a girl that wouldn't die tragically or betray him, or like, because the problem with Tony is he will get involved with a woman, get very, very intensely involved with that woman, and then the woman will die, or the woman will betray him, or the woman will essentially insult him to his face and drive him to drinking. Like you saw that one video I did about the issue that made me scream, "You bitch," at the top. That is the thing that happens, is he gets involved with a woman and then something bad will happen, and that's what ends the relationship, So first of all, he has to find a woman that's actually going to stick by him. and not betray him, and will actually survive her encounter with Tony Stark, and then we can maybe work on actually having a healthy relationship with somebody. Like, yeah. So there'd be a lot of work that would have to be done first if you're going to bring that into the comics universe. But I honestly, I would like to see that, because one of the things that in modern times is actually somewhat positive is the fact that that he does have positive interactions with a lot of these younger, newer characters, that they're, you know, the young characters that are not well liked for good reasons. But at the same time, you do have Tony being kind of like the mentor figure to all of these younger heroes. And I think that at least, I mean, that may be them trying to bring in the possible dad role, you know, and if there's one positive thing that comes out of all of these new characters that they're trying to create sort of badly, it's that well, at least Tony's having some good interactions with them, you know.
Well, they seem to have. I've gotten the feeling Marvel started to pull back on the new characters a little bit. It seems like they're putting the old a bit more front and center.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think they did realize that they weren't really landing. So yeah.
So after losing a hot rod race and getting clowned on Twitter for a third time, Tony has a big party, and Patsy Walker, the Hellcat, shows up. And I've noticed, like, they made Hellcat Peter Parker's girlfriend briefly, and they had Peter Parker wear the ask me about my feminist agenda shirt, just as a way of, like, I don't know, clapping back at people on Twitter who didn't like that comic book cover. So it seems to me like Hellcat, who was originally like a romance comic character, right? And then they brought her into the Avengers. They've made her kind of like their default strong feminist character, and they seem to use her a lot as like a weird fake girlfriend for the main heroes when they're depressed. So she describes herself as like a tough love friend, but she and Tony have a back and forth. I don't think this is the conversation that has a lot of the really obnoxious stuff in it. Some of that comes later, but she reintroduces herself, and as kind of like the bad guy plot is brewing in the background, they decide to go out and just have a little, you know, romp about town, see if they can find some bad guys to stop. And here it is. So I think both of us might have highlighted this, but Tony tries to talk about his emotions, and then when he tries to talk about his emotion, he says, you know, I feel like I was a man with a suit and it was all so easy, and then that man gets a company, right? He's trying to be real with her and unburden to her, and then she nitpicks him about using the word man to describe his own emotions. She wants him to use gender neutral language when describing his emotions. I think you had the comment that you didn't mind that too much. Like it's something that you could overlook.
Ignore it. Yeah, because there was that. I said I could ignore it because there was actual genuine emotion happening in that scene. Like, so I was like, I mean that it's like the fly in your punch bowl, but the punch is actually pretty good. Like, that's actually not the most obnoxious thing that happens in these 3 issues. That's when it comes to obnoxious things that happen in these 3 issues, that's way down on the list. But yeah, that scene, except for that fly in the punch bowl, I actually rather liked, because it did fit. It does fit my reading of that Tony's always had this uncertainty about who he really is. That from the very earliest comics, he's always had this kind of internal monologue going on where he's questioned, where he keeps saying in the early comics, you know, oh, if only I could show the real me, but I have to hide behind this mask that is Playboy industrialist Tony Stark, or I have to hide behind this mask that is Iron Man, and who is the real me? All I am is masks and facades. It's a very interesting theme that kind of runs through these Iron Man comics. So in the scene when he's saying, you build the suit of armor and you have this company and eventually you lose sight of the man, right? It fits in quite well with what we see him saying about himself in earlier canon. So
his emotions are fitting. I think maybe the part that isn't working for me is that Hellcat's being used as the tough love, I'm going to give it to you straight sort of character, but she's neither a romantic interest for him. So in a romantic interest, when a woman is giving it straight to the male character, that adds a lot to the idea that they actually have a relationship underneath the romance, like a truthful back and forth. I don't know if they've ever been romantically involved, but I just feel like
I don't
Hellcat, Hellcat as the feminist is being offered as the wise sounding board for Tony Stark. And so when she busts his balls, it gives me like a different vibe than when like your tough, respected mentor but bust your balls, or there's a give and take in it. Like she dishes out a lot of tough comments on Tony, and he seems to just take it, like let him have like I give him like a solid roast to give back, right? So it feels like they're actually equals, who have this, I don't know, friendly but pointed back and forth between the two of them. Also, I'm a terrible sexist, so I'm just going to highlight this here, but I am 100% convinced that the artist was told he wasn't allowed to draw Wildcat's butt prominently in any panel, so they constantly put her in shadow.
Yeah, they always put her in shadow, or they just avoid drawing the crack. Like
that's my Alex Jones tinfoil hat moment there.
Yeah.
So they uncover a conspiracy of some sort where the unicorn is stealing a Gutenberg Bible, and he's raving about how he's part of some new monotheistic religion. And in the course of the battle, the Gutenberg Bible is destroyed. Tony, I've got to zoom in on this. So I'm actually going to, I think I can zoom in all the way. This is, I laughed so hard. So he has a smart alecky comment about, oopsie, one of the 21 existing Gutenberg Bibles was destroyed in our battle with Unicorn, but there was really nothing I could do. And then someone posts a meme of fat Tony Stark and he deletes his account. Oh no. The only thing this needed was for Tony Stark to have a blue check mark by his name.
Honestly, he probably should have. Like, the artist probably should have included a blue check mark, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway.
So issue 2, I guess issue 2 kind of spoils it because it shows like the evil bad guy announcing his evil plan. So, like I knew the guy in the first issue was a little suspicious, but now I basically know he's a major villain with a god complex.
Yes.
And cuts to Tony fighting the Absorbing Man in Arcade's reality. And it kind of implies that, I don't know, Tony's been wanting to get into a bare knuckle brawl and he's powered down. So like the Absorbing Man is actually kicking his can, pardon the pun, in this fight. Do you have any thoughts on kind of like, I guess the opening of issue 2?
Yeah, I don't think it's I don't think it's just implied. I think it's basically explicit that at this point, Tony is seeking ways to destroy himself, essentially. So it's not simply that he wants to get into a knockdown bare knuckle fight. It's that he wants to do so and lose. That he's actively seeking ways to destroy himself, or essentially to kill himself in some way that would be dramatic or heroic. Later on in this issue, he essentially says that that's what he wants to do. If I were to die doing something heroic, what would happen, right?
Yeah.
So
like that's a really good theme for him. I
Yeah,
think. I guess my overall problem with the 2020 Iron Man is it's got a really good theme, but you have to execute it in a way that fits with the theme. So if he's a simp and he has a messiah complex, that doesn't work as well as if he's a great man and he has a messiah complex, right? Like
right.
if you're a loser and you want to sacrifice yourself, you're a loser. If you're a hero and you want to sacrifice yourself, it's like, okay, now you need like I like to see some people show him respect, a little respect, so that when they give him the harsh words, that like it balances out, I guess, from a storytelling
Yeah,
perspective.
that's it. Yeah, so that I think what you've hit on there is the primary issue. Is that the primary issue with this run so far is that basically the entire universe is arrayed against him. Like, there's nobody out there who is willing to give him a rake or give him any kind of respect at all. It doesn't matter like who he's interacting with. Basically, so you have everyone on Twitter is roasting him to death. You have in issue 3 coming up, you have random school teachers roasting him to death. Nobody actually appreciates him. Like, and that's why I was saying in my last video that it's getting to sadistic levels now. Let's all attack Tony Stark. Nobody loves him. Like, and yeah. So it makes it the way it's being executed. It makes it look like he's a loser and a whiner, and not someone who's actually dealing with some very deep stuff spiritually and emotionally. That is kind of putting him in this dark sort of dangerous place. At least if you want to keep him alive, it's not being treated with the seriousness really that I think it deserves.
Right.
Yeah.
So after surviving his fight, there's I got a chuckle out of it. He does some meditation with Patsy Walker, and he can't stop thinking, which I think is a good fit for an intellectual character.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does work for him because he has the history of if there's something that's bothering him, like he won't sleep. And then people will come by and be like, "Dude, Tony, go to sleep." Like, so he does kind of have that like that obsessive manic aspect that if a thought gets in his head, he can't get rid of it no matter how hard he tries. So that fit with the character too, and that's why I gave them props for that. And I actually laughed at that because that is very much in character. Yeah.
It's personality comedy that fits with the personality of the character, which I always give props to.
Yeah.
The Cardiac, who I haven't seen Cardiac since like he was a guest star in Spider-Man in the 90s, but Cardiac kidnaps some of the doctors from Stark Industries and threatens to suffocate them to teach Tony Stark a lesson for being a heartless billionaire capitalist. Basically, It's kind of like a nice I don't know, like Cardiac's an SJW terrorist theme, kind of raving lunatic. And because Tony has powered down, and because I'm a sexist, once again, look, no butt crack. I know what the art. I can just see in my mind the artist had to pull out his eraser and erase that while Tom Brevoort was watching to make sure no one got offended. But Tony Stark has to break into the iron bubble to save the doctors, and I think this part resonated with both of us. But basically, to get into it, he basically has to put his life on the line, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's a very, very good, very, very classic Tony Stark heroic moment because, as I've said in my videos, gratuitous acts of self-sacrifice are pretty much a running theme in Iron Man. I mean, all heroes sacrifice themselves to some degree, but in Tony's case, he takes it to a level that oftentimes borders on unnecessary. Like, and he really doesn't have any sort of self-preservation instinct whatsoever. It seems like sometimes, or he just doesn't seem to value his life all that much. So you have, you know, I was saying in one of my videos, way early in Tales of Suspense. We're talking like, you know, the second or third issue that he was a character in Tales of Suspense. There's a scene where he's grappling with this villain, and he determines that if he turns off this villain's kind of electrical grid or whatever, that he'll be able to stop the villain. But at the same time, like the EMP that would go off would also disable his armor, and because his armor was essentially his iron heart at that time, it would also essentially stop his heart eventually. And the villain knows this and says, you know, if you do that, you'll kill yourself too. And he's like, well, everyone's got to go sometime. And he pulls the switch. And so like even back then, he's like, he has no value. He doesn't value his life at all. That's why I said I was really excited when I read that part, because that is very, very classic Tony Stark.
Yeah.
People are in danger. My life doesn't matter.
Right.
Let me break my body to save them. Like, you know. So, so that worked for me very much so.
Yeah. Now, kind of continuing the theme of like, how are they using Hellcat as a tough love character? So there's a bit where after Tony saves the day, the media portrays Cardiac as a sympathetic villain and just doesn't talk at all about what Tony did. So it's almost like sad horn, like he's trying to throw his life away heroically, and people aren't even paying attention to him. So I get, there's one of those things where I like part of it.
Yeah,
I like the idea of Hellcat not encouraging him to have a false messiah complex, where it's exactly like it's like in Hamilton, where George Washington tells Hamilton, dying is easy, young man, living is harder, right? What he needs is he needs someone to tell him that living to fight another day is a type of heroism, that throwing your life away is the same as sacrificing your life for something noble. And I feel like they mangle it because they have to have Hellcat represent the 21st century feminist woman. So she basically tells him to check his privilege. Yeah.
And I'm not going to, I'm going to encourage people to watch my video on issue 2 so I don't repeat the entire 36 minute rant that I had in that one about how Tony has in fact checked his privilege. That in fact, checking his privilege is an essential aspect of his character. That from the very beginning, he has always been conscious of the fact that as someone who is a millionaire / billionaire, depending on which era you're in, he's in a position in society where he can do more, and he has in fact attempted to do more in quite a few causes. You know, it's not like he's sitting there in a swimming pool of dollar bills, just hoarding all those resources to himself. He has, in fact, you know, what I said in my video, the key line was noblesse oblige.
Yeah,
has always been an aspect of this character. So,
the writers are missing out on one of the reasons this is falling flat is the writers are missing something about Tony's self-sacrificial character, and B, they're putting it in the mouth of a character who has a long history, but you know, like you instantly lose sympathy for a character when she brings up your race. The only people who think it's cool to bring up someone's race in the context of attacking them, I don't know. It's like a really nasty person they're trying to write for. It's trying to do a heroic conversation scene or an appeal to live. She's basically trying to tell him that he should want to live. Yes. But the wokeness is completely undermining that and robbing that of the emotional impact I think it's supposed to have.
Yes. Yeah, actually talking to you now is really clarifying some things in my mind, because I think you've really hit on like I saw red when with this scene, because yes, he has tricked his privilege, and I went into this whole rant. But yeah, I think the more fundamental error, as you identified, is what he doesn't need the woke lecture. What he needs is someone who actually cares about him and says no, you should want to live. It's heroic to want to live. That's what's actually required here, and that's not what we're getting. So yeah.
So this is Tom Brevoort's really awkward editorial comment on this page. He's wondering, do people want me to be a hero? Do they just want me to be a demon and they're always going to hate me? Yeah. Tom Brevoort writes, number one, a supernatural entity that exists on a plane between that of gods and humans. Number two, a shepherding spirit that offers protection, inspiration, and or guidance toward salvation. Tom. And he doesn't even like have, there it is. Okay, Damon, there it is. Okay, I misspoke. There is an asterisk that it refers to.
What a daemon is, yeah.
Right.
So you put the editorial note there, but no editorial notes explaining that he's a clone, or that he was in a relationship with Jan, or
right. So I guess it's okay. It's okay if the editor wants to alert young readers, like if there's a complex term being used. But right, like it came out of left field, and there are whole like story arcs that. So I'm kind of speaking as I'm speaking as the guy who hasn't been keeping up with modern Marvel comics. Right. Mm-hmm. All I know is that some BS went on. I get a hint of what that BS might be, and I'm just supposed to accept it. One of my problems with modern comics is there's almost no solution to it. Right. Like if you as a writer, you have to acknowledge what went before, but if what went before is BS, what do? I guess you could pretend it didn't happen and just say, okay, I'm just going to write what I think is a cool Iron Man story, and I don't care what the continuity is.
Yeah. Well, and it's not like the company really cares about the continuity all that much, too, because you have this new series that has just started. But, Tony's still in the ongoing Avengers book, too, doing completely different things that have nothing to do with what's going on in this book, which never used to be true. It used to be that the whole Marvel universe was this cohesive whole. And if Thor was off in Asgard fighting some villain, then he would not show up in the Avengers book that month.
Right. Or they could get away with it by saying this story takes place a week before the events of that book. Yeah.
Yeah. But now you can have Tony in Dan Slott's book fighting the robot revolution. And then meanwhile, in Jason Aaron's book, he's in 10,000 BC at the same time. Like, what the heck?
They need to maybe like simplify their number of books. Like it has to be feasible for one person to read all of it and understand all of it. Like if the biggest super nerd can't follow it, then obviously there are going to be more continuity mistakes showing up. Yeah. I really liked this scene where Tony shows up just to like say hi to some kids and talk to them about magnetism. And then the teachers show up and tell him he's not welcome there unless he makes an appointment. I kind of love it from the perspective that's the kind of quote unquote deconstruction I like, because it would actually highlight an problem. Of like overly controlled, military schools where nothing fun is ever allowed to happen. It's all super structured.
Yeah, that's what I said on my blog too. Like, how am I supposed to interpret this scene? Because you could interpret it, as you said, the author actually pointing out a genuine problem. The fact that elite education is way too focused on, militarization and structure. But but like, is that what he intended? It's really hard to say. Or is it just this is just more dump on Tony stuff to to continue with the theme of everybody in the world is going to dump on Tony because he's a complete loser, you know?
Right.
What's the goal of this scene? Yeah.
Maybe my advice on this would be like pick a theme. Like, so there's like the technology theme, and there's the depression theme, and there's the self-sacrifice theme. Like, pick a
theme.
theme.
Yeah.
That. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do like that. You're right, where it's a little hard to interpret what they're going with, but I kind of got a neat vibe from. I guess I was interpreting it as, yeah, like Tony doesn't have a place to. The good classic superhero doesn't fit in with kind of like our new cynical world. There's another like eat the rich comment where someone's mad at him and destroying his stuff, and he nearly kills the melter. And saves him at the last minute. And Patsy, I think, rightly roasts him for it a little bit. Your thought was maybe like this wasn't treated as seriously as it deserved, like to have Tony almost kill someone in a moment of rage.
I definitely believe that it should have been. It was not treated seriously enough because, like him almost killing someone in a moment of rage is not completely out of bounds. Because canonically he has had moments, but he does have a temper. He will lose his temper, and haul off and almost hit someone, or almost, or get this close to torturing someone because he's frustrated that they're not giving him what he needs in order to do what he thinks he needs to do to save the world. So he has that sort of dark side to him. But whenever that's happened in the past, someone goes in and goes, "Whoa, what the hell was that about?" Like, and Patsy roasts him here, but does not say, "Whoa, what the hell was that about?" Like, and that's what was needed because whenever Tony gets to that level where he's in that, he is very close to tipping over the moral line. Again, in the past, someone has always intervened and said, "Whoa, stop." Clearly, something is going on. We need to stop and we need to talk about it. So
something I'm connecting is in a lot of the older comics, especially like Stan Lee era, it would be emphasized to soap opera proportions. Like there would be big emphatic gestures and like a real dramatic speech. And it was cheesy, but it served to kind of underscore the thing. Like if someone crossed a line, it would be made a real big, emotions flaring moment. And so you knew from a storytelling perspective that this wasn't a little thing. This was a big deal.
Yeah, but but you don't even necessarily need the melodrama to get the point across. Because if you fast forward to Hickman Vengers, there's a scene in that whole story arc that ended with Secret Wars, in which Tony essentially threatens to torture the Black Swan, and Reed Richards sees this and goes, "Whoa, what the hell's going on?" And the scene didn't involve any melodrama, but it still got the point across that, wow, Tony's now in this place that we need to pull him back from because, whoa, stop. So that's what's missing here is that I was saying in my video, one of his long-term friends needs to come along and say, "What the heck is going on with you? You're like, you're basically cutting off all your ties with the people that you normally hang around with." And I just heard, like, in the middle of a public street, you almost killed a guy. Like, what the heck's going on? That's not you, and the fact that that's missing really bothers me.
Continue on with the plot. He falls into the trap of a scientist who is secretly one of his older, like, supernatural villains. And there's kind of like a neat parallel where Tony's going through this Messiah complex, and the villain wants to become God, right? So the thing the villain wants parallels the hero's moral failing, right? So that's pretty cool. And then he brings in 3 baddies to kill Tony Stark, and I think they look pretty dope. There's a fun little scrappy brawl scene where they're beating each other up. There's a couple little dopey lines, like he jokes about how the bliss name of an iced treat, and also the name of the bad guys. So that's a little corny, but they look pretty cool. And it ends with Hellcat basically down for the count, and Tony blaming himself, which you thought that's something that kind of fits with maybe Tony's.
That definitely fits with him. Yeah, I said that's classic Tony Stark. If anything bad happens in his general vicinity, it's his fault, whether it is his fault or not. Like it's if somebody uses Stark brand tech to commit evil, it's Tony's fault.
Yeah.
If something bad happens to Tony, or in Tony's vicinity, or if something bad happens to one of Tony's friends, because a villain attacks Stark Industries and his friends just happen to get caught in the crossfire, it's Tony's fault. Everything is Tony's fault, according to Tony Stark. So that fit very well, and I give him props for that.
And in an issue where you're talking about Tony having a Messiah complex, that's a good flaw to bring to the front.
Yeah.
So what do you think this needs? What do you think this series needs to rescue it, basically? Like, because I think we both found little things we resonate with, but the total effect isn't working. Can they correct ship? And if they can, how do they correct ship at this point?
Well, first, a couple of things need to happen. First of all, we need to bring in some of his standard supporting cast, honestly, because people like Rhodey and Pepper, those people who have known him for years and years and years, deserve to be in this, and they deserve to have input on what's going on, because those are the types of people, because they've had those long-term relationships with Tony, who will be able to say, who will be able to deliver what we really need, which is someone who cares about Tony and respects him, and recognizes that he is in fact someone. He's a flawed man, but he's also a good man, and someone who can recognize that and bring that good out of him. That person needs to be there to say, no, we need you to live, and we need you to live for these reasons that are very important to me, because I've known you for many years, kind of thing.
Yeah. And you mentioned Pepper. One of the things I'm thinking is, like, how do they handle the popularity of the movies? Because I don't want them to just copy the movies, but if someone sees that Tony Stark is married to Pepper Potts in the movies, that kind of puts in their brain that, oh, okay, of all of Tony Stark's girlfriends, Pepper Potts, one of the most important characters in his history, right? So maybe that's a good argument for saying, let's bring back Pepper Potts if we haven't had her a while. Let's maybe float the boat of having a Pepper Potts Tony Stark marriage and see if the readers go for that, right? I feel like there are good ways they can tap into what the movies have done in a way that'll basically be consistent with what, like if they ever turn Pepper Potts into a villain or something in the comics, that wouldn't work. But you see what I'm saying? Take what you can out of the movies and make it fit.
Yeah. Or and it doesn't have to be Pepper; it could be Rhodey too, because because Rhodey, is long-standing as well, and Rhodey has been there for like some of the darkest moments in Tony's life. I feel like I almost feel like Rhodey should be here.
Right. A
Because,
character who, the more
yeah,
credibility they have by being there for you in your life, the more weight
yeah,
you give to their opinion. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think, yeah, so I think the major thing is we need to bring someone like Rhodey in here, and instead of the kind of simp loser thing that we've got going on, treat it for what it actually is, which is him kind of, what it actually is, in my interpretation, is Tony's kind of on the suicidal edge and someone needs to pull him back, and that needs to be treated like that, with that kind of seriousness.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other closing thoughts on 2020's Iron Man issues 1 through 3?
Also, dial back on the woke politics.
Yeah. And what's really weird about it is sometimes they have like anti-woke politics, like the people
Yeah, that
attacking him
was
are saying eat the rich.
yeah.
I think it's less about showing political moments in comics and more about, I don't know, like what is the moral of this? Like I like to dumb everything down to what's the moral of the story, which is why I'll like yell at comic books and say this is moral, and
Yeah.
you pick that up.
I picked
right?
that up because, yes, I like moral things too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So for a fun change of pace, I've read this before, but I wanted to return to the very first appearance of Iron Man in Tales of Suspense number 39. It was just a pleasure to read it. A whole self-contained story, and I found your profile pic, and it jumped out at me while I was reading this. So,
Yes.
so for you, this is review, but you've told the story about how Stan Lee had a specific goal in mind with
Yeah.
the creation of Iron Man. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. So the specific goal in mind, according to Stan Lee himself, is he wanted to take a character template that his readership would be naturally inclined to hate. So and then he wanted to like turn that on its head and like challenge the stereotype, or challenge the idea that someone like this should be hated. That he saw it as like a dare. Like he was privately daring himself. Could I take like a rich industrialist weapons designer and make him something that my readers would love, right? So and he intended from the beginning to make him sort of the tragic figure. So early on in the comic, there's the panel where he says he's the rich industrious playboy. He seems to have everything, but he's destined to become the most tragic figure on earth. That basically announces Stan Lee's intention right there.
Right.
He wanted to open up to the question that, yeah, that one. Exactly. Yeah.
I think Stan had like a really good sense of the tragedy in a lot of his characters. I think that's something that he added to the superhero archetype, is he realized these are fun, simple characters. Like he'd do something like he'd say, he'd take Frankenstein, right? Let's take Frankenstein's monsters and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and match that up. Let's take, you can kind of tell that the Man in the Iron Mask was a strong inspiration for the very first draft of Iron Man, because he's going to be trapped in the literal iron suit forever, and that's going to be the tragic element.
Right.
And then he remembers to keep it fun, but he kind of knows that if there is a tragic element, it'll, like, children can wrap their mind around that. It's sort of like he has like the most simple form of a tragic character in a lot of the things he created.
Right. So, yeah, and I think like, I think over time that creators who have been associated with the Iron Man title have kind of lost sight of this original intent, in the sense that the original intent was, this guy on the surface has everything, but actually there's much more going on under the surface. And then in future iterations of the character, it seems to be like this guy has everything, and we're not really going to delve into the surface under the surface all that much. So and it kind of goes into what I said in my last video about the shift that happened kind of around the turn of the century, where suddenly Tony Stark had an ego, right?
Yeah.
Which actually, if you read those old comics, I don't get that impression at all that he has an ego. He does have a Messiah complex, but I think that's a different thing. Like, that he does have the control complex, the idea that that he can, just through the force of his own will, fix everything that's going wrong in the world, essentially. But I think that's a little different than ego as it's being interpreted now. Like, I'm trying to like formulate in my head here, like what is the difference that I'm perceiving. It's because it's not so much. The difference is the Messiah complex is not coming from a place of I'm hot shit. That's the difference.
Right.
It's coming from a place of I have this very, very deep, almost pathological sense of responsibility and guilt about the world that I need to expiate in some way.
Which is more tragic. The egomaniac is looking to cement his legacy, and even like the Twitter thing makes Tony look like more of an egomaniac. Like he cares about what people posting memes about him on Twitter, and like what you're describing, the actual need to sacrifice yourself. That puts him much more in kind of like the area of old school Spider-Man, where he has a horrible guilt complex, basically, that's driving him. Yeah. I want to highlight this panel because I just love the detail that the villainous communist Wong Chu is lying to him, and Tony immediately figures out the lie.
Yeah.
I cracked up. Like, how did he figure that out so fast? He's lying. And then his reason actually makes sense. If they could remove the shrapnel, they do it now to be sure I live long enough to design weapons for them. So he actually says something smart. He comes to a conclusion. It's the Sherlock Holmes thing. The reason we know Sherlock Holmes is smart isn't because he knows everything. It's when he explains how he knows what he knows that we realize that Sherlock Holmes is very smart.
Yeah.
And then it's the you commented this. You called it what like Vietnamistan or something. Like it's clearly Vietnam in this old issue, and in the movie it was Afghanistan. Tell me a little bit about how that got retconned over the years.
That right now I can't recall off the top of my head where they officially changed it, but it was definitely changed by the 2004 extremists, Warren Ellis. I think they just kind of it stayed Vietnam for a long while. And then like in the 90s, then that's where you started to see it kind of shift a little bit. and they did it slyly. It's not like they or they basically did it without comment, essentially. So it wasn't like they made a big production of changing it or anything. They just changed it and no comment. It like changing a cast member midstream, you know? Yeah.
I also like the detail that when he gets his armor, it's like a new body and he falls over like a baby learning to walk for the first time. Like again, they're highlighting the humanity and the foibles of the character, which is another like distinctly Marvel thing. Like it's hard to imagine Superman struggling to take his first steps, but they deliberately do that with Tony kind of like right off the bat to establish him as someone who's got who's a human side to him. And here's the double face palm moment. Oh no, what are they doing?
The double face palm. That is my Profile pic, yeah.
And I just like the simplicity of the moral. Like, let me think. It doesn't have some of the moral gray area that the movie has, where he's immediately feeling regret that his weapons are being used by terrorists. This has, like, you could have moral questions about Vietnam, but at least in this story, the Vietnamese communist is the bad guy, and Tony Stark is the good guy. And I feel like that's an important, like, if you're gonna do, they didn't do any kind of like moral comment on Vietnam in this story, but if you're going to do a moral comment on like the rightness of war or the military industrial complex, I feel like it helps establish a lot of credibility with your readers. If you say the terrorist is the bad guy, the communist is the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
Right. I'm basically telling people how to make more effective propaganda.
Yeah. Hey. But yeah, the kind of regret, the regret does come into the comics, but it doesn't come until the 70s, essentially. And that's where you get the questioning of his former activities. However, what's interesting about the kind of anti-Vietnam comics of the 70s, and how that played into basically Tony's shift from being kind of the weapons industrialist to being more of a futurist industrialist, interested in like environmental repair and stuff like that, is that they respected him enough to not say, oh, back then he was just a horrible person and now he's a better person. They actually said, they actually gave him the respect to say, at the time, I believed I was doing the right thing, and now I have changed my mind. Like, so, and, you know, and they gave him the respect to have him say that, you know, I believe that I was doing, you know, I believed I was doing what was best for my country, right? So, the 1970s anti-Vietnam propaganda ended up being more effective because they at least gave the other side a hearing.
Right.
You know?
There's also I noticed a really neat theme in this first issue of Tony, you know, using technological know-how here and there, but he is very much a brain hero right from the get-go, like hacking into the speaker and changing the message, using the oil slick to burn a line of fire to blow up the enemy base before he can kill all his prisoners. Like, he is strong, but right off the bat, they're having him come up with cool plans to get out of these fixes. So I think it's another instance of Stan Lee having a theme in mind for the character. He's smart. He's an engineer. And then he makes sure that it comes across in like dumb, stupid, fun, but really fun and clever.
Tiny transistors.
A child would understand that this guy is smart. Yeah.
Yeah. That we're gonna hand wave. We're gonna hand wave with tiny transistors. I love the tiny transistors. They are so great. I have a lot of love for Stan Lee's Tales of Suspense stories in general, and one of the reasons why I have that love is because of the tiny transistors that can do anything. Right. You know, I chose the double face palm thing as my profile pick, but if I hadn't chosen that, I would have chosen another one that comes in another panel that comes in a later Tales of Suspense issue. After his first encounter with the Melter, FYI, since we were talking about the Melter back there, after his first encounter with the Melter, which he loses because the Melter basically destroys the suit he was wearing, you know, he has to go back to the laboratory and figure out how he's going to defeat this guy. And he has this moment of self-doubt where he's like, you know, what am I going to do? This is a villain I can't defeat in the traditional way. And he has this moment of worry where he's actually genuinely, you can see that he's genuinely concerned and scared that he's not going to be able to defeat this villain. And then there, and then one of my favorite panels, one of my other favorite panels from this era comes in where he says, "But wait a minute, why? Why?" Well, he stops and says, "It's not my armor that makes me who I am. It's my brain." That's what he says. So if I hadn't chosen Double Facepalm, I would have chosen that one because yes, that the other intent behind the character is this is supposed to be a brain hero, not one who uses his brawn to get out of situations, but one who uses his brain. So that's another thing that we would have to keep in mind if the genuine desire on the part of Christopher Cantwell is to bring this character back to basics. One of the things that he would need to do is to emphasize his brain a little more too. And in addition to dealing with the Messiah complex in a way that is actually accurate to why that Messiah complex exists, bringing back some of the other things that make that made the character appealing as he was initially conceived would also help to bolster and strengthen this idea of bringing him back to basics. So using his brain, very important. You put him in situations where he can't just punch his way out, where he has to think his way out, because those make the strongest Iron Man issues, and those are in fact essential to the character concept. And then other things like the fact that as he was originally conceived, he was medically vulnerable, which Cantwell has brought in by depowering him. That's great that he's depowered.
Yeah.
Definitely lean into that a lot more, because that was the reason why when I started reading the comics, I realized that, I like this comic book character too. The primary reason is because of the medical vulnerability, because I have my own issues with chronic illness. I related to that, and I thought that was a good way to bring in this concept of a character who is disabled and chronically ill in a particular way without being super on the nose about it.
Do you know if the clone still has the shrapnel in his heart, or is that something they retconned out?
That's something they got rid of a long time ago, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, they actually they gave him a heart transplant in the 70s.
Okay.
But then, the transplants would fail, and then other things would happen to him. So they would cure him, and then they would uncure him.
Right.
They had these cycles, but the overall medical vulnerability was something that was pretty consistent, at least through the classic era. So yeah. So bringing that back and leaning into that is something that would be good for this new run.
Any other comments on Tales of Suspense number 29 you want to share?
Or Tales of Suspense 39?
39, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I think we covered the main thing. The fact that, it was a very simple, I put things in very simple, fun terms. But it did have, those hints that Stanley was aware of the potential tragedy of it. And the fact that, when he starts to use the armor, it doesn't work right away. It kind of highlights something that I've said a lot about the old comics that make the old comics in many ways better than some of the newer comics that are coming out now, is that Tony loses a lot. At least he's losing in these new comics, so that's good. But a lot of other heroes that haven't really landed with the general populace haven't really landed because they don't seem to struggle all that much. Whereas, in these classic Iron Man comics, Tony struggles all the time to win. when you have a fight, the fight can sometimes go on for half of the book, and there'll be like points in the fight where you're wondering, is Tony actually going to survive this? Like, there needs to be more of those in comic books in general. We need to go back to that more, the higher stakes, actually endangering your hero and wondering in the middle of the fight, are they actually going to win this fight? Or are they going to survive? Like, instead of like, one punch and done,
The fact that Stan is kind of interested in the coolness factor means he's throwing a lot of cool out. He's throwing so many cool ideas out there that a later writer can actually come back to it and find cool ideas in Stan Lee's story. Like, one thing that stood out to me is that the Chinese scientist, his name escapes me, but his death is heroic, but it's almost just kind of like immediate boom, and then Tony's back to kicking butt, right? Like, what that means is that like something really dramatic happened. It almost happens immediately and is almost forgotten about, and then that emotional warmth is still there years later for Tony to pull from.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he's got the basically Stan Lee is like the gospel mark of Iron Man, because immediately this happened, but like then you could have the Apostle John come back later and do some exegesis about what happened. Like, so that what Tales of Suspense 39 does is it lays a very good groundwork for later stories that can really pull out and highlight the emotional resonance of the story, right?
Fantastic. Well, I think we've covered the 4 issues we wanted to discuss. We gotta make it a thing to kind of like slowly work my way through the 30 years of Iron Man history, one issue at a time. Recreate your Iron Man journey with me.
Not 30 years, 60 years.
60 years, yeah.
Almost. He started in 63, so
nice.
Yeah, so we're approaching the 60th anniversary.
I want to rewatch the Iron Man movie too. I haven't watched that in a few years. I've always enjoyed it. That's one of my favorites out of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe canon. Like they started really well, and I think that helped. I'm not entirely sold on this, 40 movies all in the same universe, but they did start with a really good beginning.
Yes, and if you go back and watch that movie now that you have read Tales of Suspense number 39 again, you'll see that they basically they retained all of the like basic dramatic beats while they were updating it. So so they hewed pretty close to comic book in the beginning, and then they veered off in their own directions.
Right.
But I think that might have helped too. The fact that they really just to ease people into it. Let's be close to the comic book first before we start doing our own thing. Yep. Yeah.
All righty. So thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
The Right Geeks channel is linked in the description below. You do have a Patreon, but you prefer PayPal for people who would like to support your channel. So I've included that in the description as well. Anything else you want to tell us about your plug your blogspot, plug your Twitter? Go.
All right. So I'm on Twitter as The Right Geek. And I am I also have rightgeekdailytony.blogspot.com. That's where I'm just posting random panels that I enjoy from Iron Man comics with my little commentary on them. And I'm also posting written reviews of some of these new Iron Man comics as well. Those are being posted there, and some general commentary as I come up with it. So yes, rightgeekdailytony.blogspot.com is my Iron Man blog. So
All righty, and we might get a chance to torture me with more new Iron Man comic books soon.
Yeah. So they're monthlies. So sometime in December will be the next time we'll torture you with a new Iron Man comic.
Nice. Jeb Jam, thank you for joining us in the comment section. Thanks to everyone who watches this. Links in the description. And thank you to my guest, The Right Geek, for joining me to chat about Iron Man comics. It's been a pleasure. With that, we'll catch you all later. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.